Hello and welcome to Food Tank's webinar series. My name is Sarah Small and I'm Food Tank's Chief of Staff. I'm really excited about today's webinar with Mary Babick, the Senior Communications Officer, and Oliver Gottfried, the Senior Advocacy and Collaborations Advisor, both for Oxfam America. In this webinar, they will discuss the human cost of cheap chicken. Oliver is also the campaign manager of Oxfam's Poultry Worker Justice Campaign, which aims to improve working conditions and compensation for America's 250,000 poultry workers. And Mary has authored Oxfam's 2 reports on poultry workers in the U.S., including Lives on the Line, The Human Cost of Cheap Chicken, and No Relief. This webinar will be recorded and posted on foodtank.com later today, and you can also participate and follow along on Twitter using #FoodTank. Please also submit your questions using the chat box in your control panel, or you can email them to me, Sarah, S-A-R-A-H, @foodtank.com, or send them in on Twitter. So without further ado, Mary and Oliver, it's wonderful and to have both of you back on our webinar series, and I'm excited to hear your presentation today and some updates on your campaign, so I'll give you the floor now.
Great. Well, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Food Tank, for having us. This is Oliver Gottfried. I'm the campaign manager of Oxfam's Poultry Worker Justice Campaign, also called Lives on the Line. And Food Tank was very gracious to have us on back in November, which was just a few weeks after we launched the campaign publicly for the first time. So we're very excited to be back about 8 or 9 months later and give an update on everything we've been able to accomplish so far and what we still hope to accomplish in the future with our campaign. So I am going to start with a quick overview of some of the issues that our campaign has uncovered in regards to working conditions for poultry workers in the United States, and then get into a bit more about our campaign. For those who are familiar with the campaign already or were potentially part of the previous webinar, this first part might be a little bit repetitive, and so I obviously apologize ahead of time about that, but want to give a little bit of an overview of some of the issues we've been raising before getting into specifically what we've been working on our campaign. And then I will turn it over to Mary after a little bit to give an update on some of our more recent activities. So to begin, Americans eat, and it is one of the most popular and most profitable industries in our food sector. We, on average, eat about 89 pounds of chicken per year, and that number is projected to continue increasing. And there is a tremendous amount of consolidation in the poultry market. So as you can see here, the top 4 companies control almost 60% of the poultry market, and the top 10 companies overall control almost 80% of the market. So really what you have is the situation where these biggest poultry companies, and some of them are names that you will definitely recognize, Tyson Foods, Pilgrim's Pride, and Perdue, as well as Sanderson, they have tremendous control over the market. They dictate the products that we buy, the kinds of food that we eat, where we buy them. They have contracts and relationships with all of the major grocery stores and fast food restaurants and casual food restaurants and the schools and other institutions where we buy food. It is very, very hard for you to eat chicken in this country and not have it come from one of these 4 companies. In addition to that, you may be buying a product from these companies without you even knowing it, because these companies together market their products under dozens of different brand names and hundreds of different products. So you may buy Hillshire Farm sausage or Sara Lee deli meats or Weaver chicken nuggets, and really what you are buying is from one of these 4 companies. And that includes so-called natural or organic brands as well. Coleman Natural, Coleman Organic, some of the most popular natural food products, those are actually owned by Perdue. So really, you may think that you have a choice of where you buy your food and who you buy your food from, but in reality, as with some other industries in the food sector, it's really your choices being dictated by these giant companies. And one of the ways that situation manifests itself in a really terrible way is for the life of these poultry workers. So poultry processing workers are the ones who take live chickens that arrive at a poultry processing plant and turn them into the chicken nuggets, chicken tenders, and chicken sandwiches that we buy in the grocery store or that we eat at a fast food restaurant. They live lives and do their jobs very similar to what you see in this picture. They stand for hours on end as a conveyor belt brings chickens for them to process, just chicken after chicken, hour after hour, and day after day. Each person has one particular job. They are either cutting the wings off or pulling the chicken tenders out, pulling the skin off, cutting the legs off, and that's what they do day after day, hour after hour. And the chickens come by at a rate of about 35 to 45 chickens every minute, which means that you're basically processing a chicken every 1.5 to 2 seconds. These workers have sharp knives, and they're made to work incredibly quickly. On top of that, these plants are very cold. Chickens are obviously kept cold for food safety reasons, and there are obviously chicken parts, blood, and guts everywhere. There's chemicals all over the place that are used both to clean the equipment and to keep the chicken free of diseases. Really, just a terrible working condition. And so Oxfam spent several years talking to hundreds of workers all around the country, and really uncovered 3 main problems that they told us about. The first is that these workers are injured at incredibly high rates. Obviously, as you can imagine from the description that I just gave, it's a very dangerous job, and one that involves a lot of injuries and illnesses. They are not paid very well, and I'll get into a little bit more specifics of that in a few minutes. And really because of who these workers are, and I'll talk about the demographics of the workforce in a minute, they really operate in basically a climate of fear, constantly filled with daily examples of harassment and discrimination. So to dig a little bit more deeply, briefly into each of these 3 issues. So these numbers come from a survey that was done of poultry workers in Alabama by one of Oxfam's partners, the Southern Poverty Law Center. A tremendous organization, surveyed 300 workers there a few years ago. And we use these numbers because they're very indicative of what we've seen from workers elsewhere, and they're very alarming numbers. So as you can see, basically about 3/4 of workers were reporting that they had significant work-related injury or illness, including cumulative trauma. As you can imagine, having to process a chicken every 1.5 to 2 seconds really tires your muscles out, and the rates of musculoskeletal injuries for workers in the poultry industry is incredibly high. And what that means is they suffer from the kinds of problems that are noted here in the number on the right. 86%, and we're talking about almost every single poultry worker, reported things like hand and wrist pain, swelling, numbness, inability to close their hands, and for many workers, these can be lifelong problems where they actually lose the ability to use their hands or their wrists or parts of their upper body. Just to, before I move on, these numbers, poultry workers suffer illnesses 5 times more than the average worker, far, far more than what you see for just an average worker in the US, and they suffer from carpal tunnel syndrome, which again for them can be a lifelong and debilitating injury at 7 times the average for all workers. So really just an incredibly dangerous job. On top of that, these jobs don't pay very well. These are not minimum wage jobs, but they are low wage jobs. The average poultry worker makes about $11 an hour, maybe $11.50 an hour, which averages out to about $20,000 to $25,000 a year for a full-time job. And those wages have not kept pace with inflation. We've seen actually a 40% decline in those wages just in the last 30 to 40 years. So at that rate, you basically have a poultry worker who works full-time. If they have a family of 3, they're living right around the poverty line. And it would mean that they would qualify for an enormous number of federal benefits, food stamps, school lunch, Head Start, as well as some potential state benefits as well. And when you have this going on at the same time that these poultry companies, while our consumption of chicken keeps going up, making incredible profits. These are companies that make hundreds of millions of dollars every year. They are setting records for their profits each quarter that they report them. And the heads of these companies, the CEOs, are bringing in enormous sums of money. So the CEO of Pilgrim's, which is the 2nd largest poultry company in the United States, he made $9 million in 2014. That's up almost 300% in just 4 years. For comparison, he makes as much in 1 day as one of his poultry processing line workers makes in an entire year. So on top of injuries, and low pay, what often manifests for these workers is they operate in a climate of fear. This is an almost entirely minority workforce. There's very few Caucasians who do this job anymore. A significant number of African Americans, significant number of Latinos, many of them here immigrants from other countries, and many of those immigrants who are here from other countries are here undocumented. There's also, as the industry struggles to fill these jobs because of such incredibly high turnover due to injuries and illnesses, they've started to turn to more and more economically desperate populations. So indigenous populations from Central and South America, refugees from Africa and from Asia, and even in some cases they bring in prisoners from the local prison to fill jobs on the line because they're having trouble filling those jobs. There's also a significant number of women. There's not an enormous, there's not hard numbers from the federal government. They don't count the poultry industry just by itself, so we don't have a definitive number, but anecdotally, experts believe that about 50% of the workforce is women and about 50% men. So what the poultry companies do is they deliberately take advantage of these demographics to keep these workers quiet and prevent them from speaking out about the terrible conditions that they face. Workers are routinely subjected to harassment and discrimination, whether it's racial discrimination or gender discrimination or religious discrimination. Harassment. They are threatened with firing for immigrants who are here, especially if they're here illegally. They are threatened with deportation. And what that means is that workers are terrified of ever speaking out. They see coworkers stand up and speak out, whether it's to say this, I'm not being treated very well, or I just got injured. And then what ends up happening is those workers get retaliated against, and it keeps the workers who see that happening very quiet. In a few ways that this manifests itself that's particularly bad. Many plants employ what's called a point system, where workers are given a point for any time they have an infraction of some kind, whether they're late to work, or they slip and fall, or they report an injury. But the policies around those points are very unclear. Workers never know how many points they have, how many points it takes until you get fired, how to get a point removed from your record. And so for all they know, they could be just one slip up away from losing their job. And although the job doesn't pay very well, and it's not a very good job, it is the only job that they have, and often have very few other options for employment. So workers are terrified to ever speak out. And one of the worst ways that this manifests itself is something that we detailed in a report we put out a few months ago, where workers are actually routinely denied the opportunity to use the bathroom while they are on the processing line. Obviously, poultry companies have to process an enormous amount of chicken, and to do that, they have to run their lines fast, and they do not give workers breaks very often. Workers work usually an 8-hour shift. They get potentially one 30-minute break in the middle of that, maybe one other 5 or 10-minute break, but they're basically working 4 hours without a break. And companies do not hire enough replacement workers to allow someone to rest for a minute, to recover from an injury, or to use the bathroom. And so workers are stuck on the line and unable to move or leave for fear of getting punished for leaving the line. So what happens is workers will deliberately reduce their intake of fluids so that they don't have to use the bathroom. But if they do have to, they'll often resort to, unfortunately, urinating on themselves or defecating on themselves on the line, or wearing diapers to work. And we've spoken to some workers who have been forced to wear diapers to work because they are not allowed to leave the line to go to the bathroom. So really just a terrible situation. So Oxfam has been working on this issue for many years. We work with a number of partner organizations, which I'll talk about in a minute, and we decided that there was something that we had to do about this. So I'm going to turn it over to Mary.
Thanks, Oliver. I think you outlined the problems very well. I would reiterate at the beginning of our analysis of this, we did investigate the industry quite a bit and discovered that this is a thriving industry that is built on really skyrocketing consumer demand. So the last time we checked, it was a $50 billion industry that produced 8.5 billion chickens every year, and it just keeps going up. And the profits keep going up and the executive compensation keeps going up while the workers are treated the same way they always have been, which we also heard from many folks is the dirty secret at the heart of the industry, as you outlined the problems, the injuries, the low pay, the climate of fear. The long history of vulnerable populations extends from African American women to what one author called the Hispanic Project, which was executives deciding they needed to tap into immigrant populations to do these jobs. And now it's extending to new groups of vulnerable workers, such as political refugees and new immigrants from Africa and Asia, and as you mentioned, prisoners. These folks not only don't know their rights, but they are terrified to speak out and lose their jobs because there are literally lives back in their home countries depending on these jobs and these wages. So there had been some attempts in the past to expose the industry. There was a great series in the Charlotte Observer. Some of our photographs are from that series. And there were writers who actually went inside the plants and posed as workers and tried to uncover what was going on. Chris Leonard wrote a great book called The Meat Racket, which specifically focused on Tyson and the consolidation and vertical integration in the poultry and meat industries. But somehow it remained a secret for a lot of folks. We just weren't thinking about labor in the food system and particularly labor in the meat and poultry industries. Oxfam had experience with farm workers, and we'd seen how we needed to elevate that issue in both produce and tobacco industries. So we embarked on investigating and researching our report, which is called Lives on the Line, which is the first national comprehensive report on conditions in the industry. We interviewed workers and advocates, experts and attorneys, and a lot more, and came up with our full report. In doing that, we realized that the workers' voices were critical to conveying the reality of what it's really like inside these plants. So we created our interactive website, which you can see a picture of here, that actually features video footage and audio footage of workers talking about their experiences inside the plants. This was, we thought, really successful. We got a lot of media coverage, interviews. We put out a petition trying to get consumers to speak out to the top 4 companies to express their desire that conditions change inside the plants, and we got over 150,000 signatures on that petition. It was great, and we planned a couple spikes around the campaign. One was in January, around Super Bowl Sunday, and the highest consumption of wings all year, and we got some attention to it then. And then we decided we needed another spike, and we turned to the workers themselves. So we asked them what was the thing that really bothered them the most. There was an organization in North Carolina who actually built a campaign around the thing that bothered them the most, which was the denial of bathroom breaks. So we investigated this more and more. We interviewed a lot of workers. We asked the workers' organizations to do surveys of their workers. And the stories we heard were just horrifying. As you mentioned, a lot of workers stopped eating and drinking. They see their coworkers almost daily urinating on the line, rushing to the bathrooms if they do get a break. They all go to the bathroom at the same time if they do get a break, and so they're all jostling in the long lines for very few facilities. A lot of people resort to wearing diapers. People are really suffering. So when we put out that report the day that we delivered the petitions to Tyson, it was called No Relief. And at the same time, Debbie Berkowitz, who used to work for OSHA, published an op-ed in Quartz, and the media attention just exploded, which was great for us. It was also brought a lot of lessons for us about what kind of issues you need to bring to the fore to get people to really understand what's going on. I think it spoke to a fundamental concept of what it means to be denied your basic rights at work. Everybody can relate to needing to go to the bathroom during the day and having to ask permission, and being denied permission was just something that people could not fathom and really spoke to them. So we really saw it go viral. Some people repurposed our video footage into other videos. There was one by AJ Plus that got over 6 million views. Our share graphic, Oliver, if you want to go down to the next slide, we had a share graphic about this that specifically spoke to Tyson. That was shared on Facebook, our Facebook, Oxfam's Facebook, over 5,000 times, and there was a real storm on Twitter using the hashtag Give Them a Break. So I think the lessons we came away with were find something fundamental that everybody can relate to, that's also shocking, and that's unique to the industry. So I think the low wages, lack of rights, injury rates were compelling, but they didn't speak to people in that visceral way of this is an industry that's just using up workers in a way that is un-American and unfathomable. So that is the bathroom report element of it. And now, Oliver, did you want to cover how we wrapped up the campaign?
Yeah. So obviously, sort of raising awareness of the issue itself was one of the main pillars of our campaign. As we've seen in some other similar efforts recently, including against the poultry industry, consumers speaking out and demanding changes of food companies has been enormously successful. Purdue just last month announced sweeping changes to their animal welfare policies to treat their chickens better, and a number of companies, including Purdue and Tyson, have all announced that they're getting rid of the use of antibiotics in their supply chain, and those changes happened because workers spoke out and demand, or because consumers spoke out and demanded it. And so we wanted to build, elements of our campaign that brought a lot of those lessons together. These reports have really helped us raise awareness of these issues and mobilize people to take action. And we have a number of other tactics that we're utilizing as well. We are talking to these companies' investors. We're filing shareholder resolutions. We're engaging with students, with faith leaders, and we're also, attempting to have dialogue with a number of companies that buy these chicken products from Tyson and Purdue and Pilgrims and the rest of these companies, the Costco's and McDonald's and Walmarts of the world. They obviously have a relationship with these companies and have a role to play in this supply chain. Oxfam's not alone in this. We are working as part of a coalition of about a dozen different groups, as you can see here. These are national civil rights groups like National Council of La Raza. There are worker-led organizations in poultry-producing areas like the Northwest Arkansas Workers Justice Center and the Western North Carolina Workers Center. We have a number of legal advocates like Southern Poverty Law Center and the National Employment Law Project, as well as the union that represents about a third of poultry workers are organized into a union. That's the United Food and Commercial Workers. They're a member of our coalition as well. So there are a number of things that we have succeeded in pushing the industry to do and to change positively so far, and we do like to give them credit for this. Tyson, and although it's not listed here, Sanderson have both announced that they're raising wages for their workers. Sanderson didn't give specifics. For Tyson, we do have specifics. About 30,000 workers, about a third of their workforce overall, now make a $10 an hour starting wage, whereas before they were making only $8 or $9 an hour. That's obviously not enough to live on. We don't believe that that's enough, but we are pleased that they've taken the step in moving things in the right direction. Tyson also announced that they are piloting a new health and safety initiative in a number of their plants. We've been asking them for more information on that to properly evaluate whether it is indeed a step in the right direction, but simply implementing new things like that is definitely a positive step. And Tyson also, for the first time, committed just a few months ago to independent third-party audits in all of their plants. This is something that no other company in the poultry industry does, but other companies in other industries do as a step towards transparency and accountability, which we really feel like is, again, a step in the right direction. That does not ensure that workers will be safer, better compensated, and trusted and respected in the workplace, so there's obviously more work to be done there. And you may also ask, what is the federal government doing about this? The federal government, and specifically the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, they do investigations, and they do in poultry plants. They do enforcement. OSHA is chronically underfunded. They don't have enough staff to go out and do lots of inspections when they are needed, and so that is not really a comprehensive enough effort to be able to catch all these problems that are happening. It's been estimated that given their staff and resources that they have right now, OSHA can only investigate 1% of all the workplaces in the country, not just poultry, but all workplaces in the country in a given year. So they do, only a handful of poultry inspections at any given time. But we have pushed them to do what's called an emphasis program, which basically means they pay more attention to the industry than they did before, doing more investigations and more enforcement. They have about a dozen of these so-called emphasis programs for industries that are particularly dangerous, so we were pleased to see them do that as well. So just quickly, as Mary mentioned, we have gotten over 150,000 petition signatures from people in all 50 states and 37 different countries calling on these 4 companies to improve their worker practices. We delivered these to Tyson back in May. This was the event that we did that at. We feel like we have succeeded in getting their attention, and now we're working to try to get them to make the changes that we believe are necessary. So with that,
Oliver,
Mary, I wasn't sure with you. Yeah, please.
Yeah,
go
I
ahead.
just want to add one thing. I think one of the really positive signs we're seeing is that OSHA is taking this more seriously and directing more resources toward it. And They just recently issued their findings from an investigation into a Pilgrim's plant in Florida, where they, for the first time, called them out for medical mismanagement, which meant that when workers went to them with injuries and illnesses, they either denied there was a problem and sent them back to work, refused to let them see a doctor outside of the plant, or just, patched them up and sent them on their way. So one of the trends that was most disturbing was the number of workers who are injured and then either don't know how to file for workman's comp and disability, or they're denied. The plants go out of their way to deny that they were injured at work, saying it's due to other factors. So this is a really positive trend, and we're waiting for OSHA to issue more of these findings, and we're hopeful about that.
Thank you, Mary and Oliver. We have listeners kind of tuning in from throughout the U.S., but internationally as well. So we should have a good Q&A session here. I just wanted to thank you first for a great presentation, and we'll get through as many questions as we can in the next about 15 minutes we have here. So our first question reads, based on the statistics you spoke about, it seems daunting to find, quote, good chicken in the grocery store. How do you suggest consumers source their poultry?
Well, that is a great question, and one that we unfortunately yet don't have a good answer to. This isn't like there, in some industries where you have sort of good actors and bad actors, and we can encourage people to go and spend their food dollars, supporting the good actors as a way to reinforce that. Our hope, really, in this campaign is to create that good actor, and then celebrate them and encourage people to use them. We have found, really, for the most part, that of these sort of larger companies, there are no better actors. They are, these conditions are persistent across all the different companies that we mentioned. Now, we obviously, there's hundreds of poultry companies around the country, some of them quite small. We haven't investigated working conditions in all of them. The more local you shop and the smaller producer that you buy from, certainly more likely that they do not, have a highly industrialized production system like some of these companies do. But we haven't been able to find that better company yet. Mary, I wasn't sure if there's anything you wanted to add to that.
No, you're right. I will say the one small action that I take is to buy whole chickens and to cut them up myself, and it does make you appreciate how difficult it is.
Great, thank you. And I just wanted to kind of chime in too and talk about how Food Tank, we also try to kind of highlight the people who are doing it right and focus on those positive aspects of who are the champions in this field. So the next question comes from our listener, Amy. She asks, do you anticipate the cost of chicken will be dramatically affected if there were more regulations on the poultry worker industry and workers' rights?
That is another great question. So, there's a couple things that I would say to that. One is that, there are a number of changes that we are asking companies to make that do not cost any money. As an example, one of the easiest ways to reduce the injuries that workers get is to rotate them between different jobs in the poultry plant so that they're using different muscle groups for, say, an hour or 2 hours at a time. That really lessens the strain on muscles and reduce your risk of musculoskeletal disorders. You could easily rotate workers within a plant with different jobs every hour or 2 hours without costing yourself any money. Similar to just simply finding mechanisms to engage your workers, listen to them, and treat them with the respect and dignity that they deserve, and not subject them to the kind of harassment and discrimination that we've seen so frequently. That is another thing that requires absolutely no money to do. But I would say, obviously, there are some things in here that do cost more money. Things like paying your workers more, or potentially giving workers greater time resting, so more time on the job. But these are companies who are making, as I said, hundreds of millions of dollars in profit every year. Again, with executive compensation rising 200% to 300% over several years, we believe that the companies have a responsibility as employers of these workers and as incredibly profitable companies to invest some of those profits back into their workforce. So it means that they can do that and they can make these changes without passing the cost on to the consumer.
Yeah, I would add also, we have tried very hard to quantify the benefits that would accumulate to the companies were they to practice more generous conditions for the workers. And there are some arguments made around productivity and lack of turnover problems and replacement problems, but it's very hard to quantify, and it's inconclusive at this point.
Thanks, Oliver and Mary. I'm going to put these two questions together. I think that they work well. So the first question asks, as a consumer, in my opinion, I do a good job at buying local organic meat. However, I struggle when I'm eating out and there is less information on sourcing. Do you have any suggestions on how to educate ourselves in this area as well? So that's from the consumer perspective, but we also have a question from the restaurant side. So Hibachi asks, on a restaurant scale, what would be a good suggestion? I currently go to HALA, H-A-L-A, slaughterhouses.
That's a great question. And Mary, I don't know if you want to tackle this one or if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, from the restaurant side, we have talked to chefs who go to local sources, and I think that's certainly one of the better approaches, both in terms of your local economy, but also in terms of knowing how the animals are treated and how the workers are treated. They're probably much smaller, and they use fewer chemicals, and they probably don't use antibiotics, so they are a better bet. But they're also likely more expensive, so I agree that is a constant tension. As a restaurant consumer, I don't really have any thoughts about that, except that you could be like the Portlandia sketch, where they inquire about the health and welfare of their chicken repeatedly.
Yeah, this is really the sort of challenge that consumers face in this sort of new landscape that we have with growing food companies that buy up other food companies and sort of a general lack of transparency. We encourage people to ask questions. When people come to us and say, I don't know where my local grocery store gets their chickens from, we say, ask them, right? I mean, these companies are starting to hear more and more from their customers, asking for sort of greater transparency. Where does our food come from? How are the animals treated? How are the workers treated? And so they will only change if they hear from their customers that the customers want this. That's part of our effort behind getting consumers to use social media to talk to these companies directly, or to sign our petition. It's to demonstrate not only to the poultry companies themselves, but the restaurants and grocery stores and others that buy their product, that this is something that that their consumers care about, and they'll be forced to be more transparent and to seek better solutions if they feel like that's where their customers want them to go. So
and they do respond. I think all the producers now shifting to not using antibiotics is directly in response to consumer demand.
Thanks, Mary and Oliver. So our next question, and I also wanted to mention thank you for mentioning that Portlandia skit. If anyone hasn't seen it, it's pretty hilarious. And I've also seen in my own kind of consumerism that there are some bigger chains also that are putting that right on the menu, which is really encouraging to see. So the next question reads, it seems like Tyson has been the biggest target and there have been small wins. Do you anticipate the other big three will follow suit, or has more energy been put towards Tyson intentionally?
So the answer to both of those questions is yes. We obviously have targeted Tyson the most so far. That is because they are the biggest, and obviously they have a tremendous ability to sort of set standards for the rest of the industry as others try to catch up to them. They are forced to follow suit. But we are also pushing the other three to make moves on their own. There isn't any reason that if Tyson hasn't moved that Purdue couldn't, and there's a perfect example of that in Purdue's recent animal welfare announcement just a few weeks ago about the different measures that they're taking to improve conditions for their chickens. That's something that their competitors have not done yet, including Tyson. So we are really trying to create what we call a race to the top, where you have one company that distinguishes themselves and gets the attention from that, and then other companies are forced to follow. And we feel like one of the ways to do that is to talk about the biggest company, the one that most people buy their chicken from, the one that has the biggest contracts with the Walmarts and the McDonald's of the world, because as the biggest and as the industry leader and market leader, we believe that they have a responsibility to change that.
I would add too, they had the best policies in print, and clearly had thought about some of these issues, and they were the most willing to engage with us, and credit to them for both of those things. But as we move farther down the line, we're hoping we can continue to make progress, but we don't know.
Thanks to you both. Our next question reads, since chicken is the most frequently eaten meat in the U.S., how do producers continue to meet demand without compromising workers' rights? Probably a question you hear often.
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, we believe, and we've done research around this and shared that, shared these opinions with the industry itself, that there is a way to meet growing demand for chicken and the incredible demand that we do have in a way that treats workers with respect and dignity, and that might mean sacrificing some of their the profits that they make, but it's not in a way that would make them unprofitable. They would still be able to make enormous profits, as Mary said. While it might cost money to make some of the changes that we're asking for, that money does come back to them when you have happier workers, healthier workers. They're more productive, and it would mean all of us would be more likely to go buy their product because we know that they're a higher virtue company. So there is a way to do that. If you have to process 1,000 chickens, it's a lot easier to do if you have 500 workers than if you have 100 workers, for example. So there is a way to sort of meet the industrialized demands of the modern poultry industry in a way that values workers and treats them with respect.
Yeah, and one key factor is that the turnover in the industry is incredibly high because of all the problems laid out, especially the injury rates. And the industry could benefit by implementing conditions that would minimize those injuries and would keep people on staff. So it's a long-term payoff for some short-term changes.
Great. And the next question reads, in your opinion, what will it take to get a stronger response from one or all of these top 4 poultry producers?
Well, to sound like a broken record, but again, if they're, the reason I keep repeating this is because it's true. If these companies feel like their customers are asking them to do this, they will be more likely to respond. And they, these companies are responsive to their customers. It's a crowded marketplace. There are a lot of companies that you can buy chicken from, and they want to be the one that you choose to do that. And so they are responsive to that. But that's not the only thing that we are pursuing. As I said, we are talking to their investors. We are talking to the companies that buy from them. And we're engaging with some of their board members. So the point is, it's when the call for improved working conditions reaches a critical mass, that's when they'll be forced to change, and that's really what we're trying to create.
Great. And the next question and our last question comes from myself, and I'm curious what other voices you wish were also part of your campaign, if there are any key players you think would be able to amplify your important message even further out into the world. So your ideal kind of collaborators here.
Mary, do you want to touch that, and I'll add some thoughts too?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a broad spectrum of people who are concerned about workers and workers in the food system. One of the, besides the workers' organizations themselves and the workers, one of our strongest allies in some of our places are leaders of faith community. These places not only serve as sanctuaries for some of the populations as they come into the country and go to work, but then they hear the workers' concerns and they bring them to the companies, and the companies tend to listen to them because they are grounded in the communities, but also because they sort of don't have any biases about this stuff. So that's been some of our most profitable alliances, I would say. I don't know, Oliver, what your perspective would be on that.
Oh, well, I wholeheartedly agree on that. It's we're looking for people who who understand the way that our food system works now, and come to it from a perspective of that experience and that interaction with the system, because those people are the most knowledgeable. So chefs and food banks and producers and small scale farmers, who raise and slaughter chickens themselves and know the specifics of it. That is these people who, it's going to be the diversity of voices from across a broad range of broad spectrum of groups and individuals that makes an impact on these companies. So if you are someone who works in food, these companies will respect that and understand that because you are in many ways a peer.
That's great. Thanks so much to both of you. And I'd love to just open it up to see if either of you have any last kind of comments or words that you'd like to share with our audience as well, or a way to find out more about the campaign.
Yeah, I'll just say quickly, if you go to oxfamamerica.org/livesontheline, you'll see the interactive website that we created, which Mary referenced earlier. Our petition, speaking to the 4 companies, is still on there, and we are still collecting signatures for that. So, learn more, contact us if you're, if you're interested in getting more involved. Speak out to these companies, whether it's by email or social media, so that they hear you, and help us tell the story of these workers to more and more people. We feel like the more people who hear about it, they will be pushed to take action, and they will be forced to react. So, Mary, I don't know if you had anything else too.
No, that's really helpful. Just today there was a very good article that came out in The Nation, so I encourage people to go read that and just try to follow the issue as it unfolds. And I think, as we've reiterated, the companies are aware of how consumers feel about these issues, and they do what they need to do to make sure they have brand loyalty.
Thank you, Mary and Oliver. It was a pleasure having you back on our webinar series, and great to hear some updates on the campaign as well. So it's been truly a pleasure, and I just want to shout out to all of our listeners too. Thank you for sending in your questions for this interactive Q&A session as well. I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and we do have our webinar again tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern, so you can sign up on foodtank.com now today, and this webinar will be posted later today on foodtank.com as well. Thanks again.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, everybody.